The moment I remember most from the courtroom isn't the judge speaking. It's the laugh. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a small, sharp laugh that slipped out of my wife's mouth when the final order was read. The room had already moved on to paperwork, but she leaned back in her chair and said it quietly enough that only a few people nearby could hear. "You'll die alone and broke." I didn't respond. By that point, I didn't have anything left to defend. The penthouse was gone, $6.8 million worth of glass and skyline views that we'd once called success. Most of the accounts had been divided in ways my lawyer called strategic. Custody had tilted in her direction too. Not completely, but enough to make the distance feel permanent. When the hearing ended, people shook hands and packed their briefcases. I walked out carrying nothing but a folder of documents that mostly explained what I had lost. 3 months later, I was in Montana. The farmhouse had belonged to my father. Or technically it still did, until he died years ago and the property transferred to me in a will I barely remembered signing paperwork for. I hadn't visited the place in almost 20 years. Growing up, I had believed my father left because he simply didn't want us anymore. One night he was there. The next morning he wasn't. My mother never explained much beyond saying he had chosen his own life. After a while I stopped asking questions. The farmhouse looked exactly like a man who had once walked away from everything would leave it. The roof sagged. Half the windows were cracked. Dust coated every surface thick enough to dull the light. It was quiet though. Quiet enough that nobody expected anything from me. For a while that was enough. I started fixing things mostly because there wasn't much else to do. Replacing boards. Clearing weeds from the fence line. Learning how to repair pipes from videos that buffered slowly through the rural internet. Physical work made the hours simpler. But silence has a way of digging things up. Some nights I would sit on the back steps and remember the last argument my parents had before my father disappeared. I had been 12. I remembered raised voices, a door slamming, and the strange way my mother refused to look at the driveway the next morning. For most of my life, I had settled on a clean explanation. He left because we weren't worth staying for. The wall started falling apart near the kitchen. At first I thought it was just rot. When I pulled off the outer boards, the wood crumbled easily in my hands. But the deeper I worked into the frame, the stranger it looked. The studs stopped in a place they shouldn't have. Behind them was empty space. It took another hour of tearing down panels before the opening widened enough to see what was inside. A small concrete room. No windows. No shelves. Just a steel safe sitting alone in the center. For a long time I stood there staring at it. Then I stepped inside. The safe wasn't especially large, but it was heavy. Industrial looking. The metal surface had dulled with age, but the carving across the top was still visible. My name, not scratched roughly either. Carefully cut, like someone had taken their time making sure the letters were right. I didn't understand that part yet. The combination lock opened after some trial with dates I remembered from childhood. My birthday finally worked. Inside were folders. Thick ones, and one envelope on top. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father's. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid signing school forms. The first line stopped me before I finished unfolding the paper. "If you're reading this, then everything I planned has worked." I sat down on the concrete floor before continuing. The letter wasn't dramatic. No apologies, no long emotional explanations. Just facts written slowly. He explained that when I was young, my mother's family had been involved in a legal conflict tied to a company they partly owned. Financial investigations, lawsuits, and accusations that were moving toward criminal territory. My father had discovered that his name, and eventually mine, was about to be dragged into it. Leaving the house hadn't been abandonment. It had been distance. If he stayed, the investigators and lawyers would have followed him. They would have followed us too. So he removed himself entirely. No contact. No legal ties. Nothing that could pull us into the mess. The letter paused there for several lines before continuing. But that wasn't the entire plan. My father wrote that he had spent the next 30 years working quietly. Different businesses, investments, things that never appeared publicly connected to me. The money had gone into trusts. Not under his name. Under mine. But structured in ways that prevented access until very specific legal conditions were met. One of those conditions was simple. The trusts would only release control once I had reached a certain age and experienced a significant financial dissolution verified through court records. I read that sentence 3 times. He had built the system assuming that, if I inherited wealth too early, I might end up trapped inside the same shallow world that had destroyed his marriage. So he waited. Not for success. For failure. The folders inside the safe contained everything: trust agreements, account keys, contact information for the legal firm managing the structure. The amounts listed on some of the documents didn't feel real. The next morning I called the number attached to the first trust manager listed. The man who answered sounded unsurprised. He asked a few verification questions, then placed me on hold. When he came back, his voice had shifted into the calm tone professionals use when something significant is being confirmed. "Yes," he said, "your father arranged for this moment very specifically. The court records from your divorce finalized the release clause last month. There was no drama in the conversation. Just procedures, forms to sign, accounts to transfer, assets that had quietly existed my entire adult life now fully under my control." By the end of the call, the practical reality was clear. My life had changed again. But strangely, my first thought wasn't about the penthouse, or my ex-wife, or proving anything to anyone. I kept thinking about the man I had spent 30 years resenting. A man who had disappeared from my childhood and never tried to explain himself, except he had. Just not in a way I could see until now. That evening I went back into the hidden room. The safe was still open. The letter still folded where I left it. Near the end of the page there was one last paragraph. "You may never forgive me for leaving," it said. "That's not something I can control. But if you ever reach the point where everything collapses and you still keep moving forward, I wanted you to know you were never alone in that." I folded the paper again and set it back inside the safe. The next day I finished repairing the wall, but I didn't seal the hidden room. I built a door instead. The farmhouse is still quiet most nights, but it doesn't feel empty anymore.